I'd like to introduce our speaker today, Mr. Brian Reedy. Brian is a native of Pennsylvania. He was raised by a family that nurtured his early interest in, yes? Yes, there's no house microphone. This is for recording. Sorry. So Brian attended California University of Pennsylvania, where he earned a Bachelor of Arts degree in history. While in college, he volunteered at Fort Necessity National Battlefield, which turned out to launch his career with the National Park Service. Over the past 39 years, he has worked at sites in Philadelphia, Valley Forge, and Montana. He returned to Western Pennsylvania to work at Friendship Hill National Historic Site and currently serves as Chief of Interpretation and Site Manager for both Friendship Hill and Fort Necessity. Today, he will be talking to us about recent archaeological findings at Jumonville Glen. Brian.
Thank you. So how's everyone doing today? Good. So I'm going to try to endeavor to keep you awake since you've had your little sugar rush, food coma, that kind of stuff going on. Also, beg pardon if my voice seems kind of scratchy. I was in Philadelphia 2 weeks ago making sure the reenactors who were invited by the park and the Museum of the Revolution did not hurt themselves or visitors. I did manage to save one young lady's life. She was wearing a New York Giants shirt in the midst of downtown Philadelphia and had no idea that those were rival colors. She just thought, I love the color of blue and red. And I'm like, not here. So I kind of joked, I saved her life. But while I was there, I acquired the crud, and as I find as I get older, it takes longer for this stuff to dissipate. And what we do is very important. I want to thank you, the board and officers of this foundation, for inviting me. When you work with the public, you sometimes realize that the public isn't always aware of their history. I was closing Fort Necessity. This is about 3-4 weeks ago, walking outside the visitor center a little after 5 o'clock, and a couple had just pulled into the parking lot. And couple gets out, and they're heading towards the visitor center. We inform them that the building's closed, but the grounds are still open until sunset. Gave them a brochure, and the gentleman said, well, before you go, could you answer an argument my wife and I have been having concerning our visit to Braddock's grave? I'm like, sure, what's your question? Was Braddock a Union or Confederate general? So, realizing that's job security for historians, I did set them straight and let them know about the British Empire and the role of Braddock as chapter 2 in Britain's attempt to kick the British out of what today we call Pittsburgh. So today I'm going to talk about the archaeological investigation we had at Jumonville Glen. For those of you who are not familiar with Fort Necessity, we will talk a little bit about the campaign, but 2 offshoots of the main park include the Jumonville Glen site, where the opening skirmish occurred on the 28th of May, 1754. And we also have Braddock's grave, dealing with the area where Braddock would pass away from his grievous wound suffered on the 9th of July, 1755, and would be buried in the midst of the road. So we have the first grave site where he was buried in the road, and then 50 years later he was removed from that site, and most of him was placed under the monument that sits atop that second grave that was put there in 1913. I say most of him. Some bones were taken. Apparently the Walter Reed Hospital Museum collection, where Sickles' leg bones are on display. It also has a piece of Braddock's vertebrae, and a set of ham bones actually made its way to the Peel Museum in Philadelphia. That was the second floor of today we call Independence Hall. That museum eventually closed, and a guy named P.T. Barnum would buy that collection and display it in his museum in New York City. That museum unfortunately burned down in 1864. So I like to joke that Braddock rests in pieces. Yes. So pardon my bad jokes and again, my scratchy throat. So why the archaeology? So in archaeology, it seems like a very fun thing to do, but you have to remember it is the science that destroys. You can't go, oops, I want to do it again. Because once that object is pulled from the ground, you can't put it back and try it again. So not like in chemistry class where maybe you had a contaminated beaker or you're trying to figure out what the compound is. Like, you can keep doing the experiment till you get it where you want it to be. Archaeology, no, you can't make mistakes on that. So archaeology at Jumonville Glen was done because of me. Take the blame for it. For the 30 plus years that I worked there, I was always that pesky little ranger who always asked, is it really the site where it happened on the 28th of May? And all those people above me would say, yeah, it is, shut up. It's where it happened. I said, well, how do you know? Because some historian told you so? It was always the legend. It was always that. So I pestered and pestered and pestered, and what happens is eventually those who were in charge retire or die, and by sheer luck and stupidity, I'm now the site manager. So I get to make decisions about the federal tax dollars that we receive to manage that park. I also have a boss above me, a park superintendent that manages the 5 parks of Western Pennsylvania, and he calls these things personal passions. And he said, Brian, what is your personal passion? For me, it was to find out whether Jumonville Glen is truly the site where that happened. The Park Service does not always have the best track record for maintaining or having the sites where things occur. If you've ever been to Washington's birthplace, it's now called the Memorial House, so they don't have the, off to the sides of the foundation where they believe where Washington was actually born. There's Charles Pinckney House down in South Carolina. Again, the original 18th century house, and when they go to restore it, they realize it's a 19th century house that went through a colonial revival. So yes, oops, so now we make that our visitor center museum of sorts. So again, that was what was driving me to answer this question about what happened at Jumonville Glen. So, a little bit of the backstory, the mission itself. Virginia, as you know, stretched all the way to the Isles of California, all the way as far north as the North Pole. I always tease kids that, you can prove that because who lives at the North Pole? Santa Claus. Okay, I was worried I was amongst non-believers here. And what color coat does he wear? Red. And who wears red coats? Yes, you didn't know Santa Claus and his elves were agents of King George II. So, yes, that's my joke. It's copyrighted. Please don't steal it. So, anyway, you also have Native Americans living in this land and also the French who are coming down from Lake Erie to establish themselves. And the governor wants to make sure, the governor of Virginia, or lieutenant governor, I should say, Robert Dinwiddie, that this land is protected for those vast land investors of the Ohio Company. So, young George Washington, again, this is the 1772 Peel painting. If you ever get down to Washington and Lee College to see the original, it's worthwhile. Washington Lee University. Oh, they got upgraded. Okay, yeah. So, anyway, I'm sure there's a very nice blue-haired Dolson down there that remembers me being down there and not being too interested in Robert E. Lee because I wanted to see this. And she's like, we have to go see Robert Lee. I joked. I said, well, I will go outside and at least see the grave of Trigger. And she like, Trigger, it's Traveler, sir. It's Traveler. So anyway, I know. I have my bad moments. But you can see the mission there that he is given. Basically, if anyone gets in his way, he's welcome to kill, capture, or destroy them. Now, what can go wrong with that with a 22-year-old kid in charge? Yeah, plenty can go wrong. On the 24th of May, Washington would arrive at the Great Meadows, the natural clearing that's been there for thousands of years. It exists because of the hydrology. It's a very high water table, so you have a meadow that was about a mile long, big crescent-shaped meadow, about 200 yards at its widest. In the midst of that, Washington would camp. And from the very first moment he arrives there, he is getting warnings that there are possibly French nearby. Those warnings are coming from various accounts. So he says with nature's assistance, he has been provided with natural entrenchments. And what he was talking about was Great Meadow Run. That's the beginnings of what we would call Fort Necessity. Those warnings come from his native ally, the Half-King, Tennessee Harrison, also through a gentleman named Davison, who is an Indian trader. And from those accounts, we know that Washington was sending out patrols. He was trying to find where these French were at. He's also getting information. Well, I should explain a little bit about why the French are out there. These are some of the orders that were given to Ensign Jumonville, or Jumonville, as locals say. He is sent down from Fort Duquesne, where the Forks of the Ohio is, to, well, his orders are interesting. He is basically told to deliver a summons to the first English officer he would encounter, basically saying, hey, you're trespassing, you need to go. He's also reconnoitering. That's kind of a nice way of saying spying. He's given a patrol of 35 soldiers, Canadians as well as Marines, and that's a pretty large party for an embassy to be out tromping through the woods. He also is told not to go beyond what today we would call Chestnut Ridge. So as he's making his way towards the English, he would camp at a site today we call Jumonville Glen, which sits atop Chestnut Ridge. It is several hundred yards off the main trail, so that would raise some suspicions as to why he was camping and not in an open manner. And, well, we'll get to what happens to him. But Mr. Gist is I always feel bad for Mr. Gist. Christopher Gist, I think, is kind of the forgotten character often in these stories. He's kind of that Daniel Boone, you know, that early version of Daniel Boone, an early settler. He's the one blazing roads. He has a settlement called the Gist Plantation near present-day Mount Braddock, with anywhere from a half dozen to a dozen families that are living there. And it's where that word that the French had arrived. They were looking to break things up. Thank goodness several of the natives that were there would prevent that. But you can also see that the rumor is running around that those French are coming to get the Half-King, either to bring him back to the French fold or to assassinate him. And that's going to play heavily, and Washington would actually use that as a means of kind of convincing the natives to stay with him. So Washington finally gets word where the French are at. At this point, he has divided his forces several times. He sent out a party of 75 earlier on that day of the 27th. They have yet to return. He gets word from the Half-King that the French are only about 7 miles away from his camp. So he divides what's left of his army. He has 150 men to begin with. So he leaves about half of that party behind. With 40, he would set off towards the Half-King's camp and where the French are. Describes as a very dark night, rainy, very narrow path. They get lost along the way. By the time they arrive at the Half-King's camp, he only is down to 33 soldiers. He describes the Native Americans as being anywhere from a half dozen to a dozen individuals, some of them with muskets, many of them did not have muskets. So they decide to strike the French. They're not going to go there for bagels in the morning. They decide they're going to attack them. And we have a 15-minute battle there that changes the world. A lot would occur at that little site that basically is like that rock that falls into a still pond, and the ripples would just reflect. Now, I'm sure as individuals in Paris and London were reading about this in their coffee shops or wherever they might have been, like, what are the colonials up to? Little realizing that what begins there is a global war that's fought on nearly every continent with the exception of Antarctica and Australia, and nearly 1 million people would lose their lives. And just from this 15-minute skirmish is where this would start. So, the project itself involved partnership, and it's very much, maybe you're familiar with World War II history, Operation Mincemeat. Anyone know Operation Mincemeat? Okay. That's basically where we were trying to disguise an operation for the invasion of Europe. They took an individual who had died of pneumonia in a hospital in England and dressed him up like he was an important person and threw him off the Portuguese coast so he would wash up on the shore and have all this information, false information, misinformation, whatever you want to call it, to kind of fool the Germans. We kind of had to do that with this. And you might be saying, well, come on, why would you have to do that? I am very protective of Fort Necessity and Jumonville Glen. There are many bad actors out there. There are also folks who want to be helpful, but we wanted to make sure that we did this right. And remember, this is a science that destroys. So we wanted to have the right individuals in place. There was an attempt to do an archaeological investigation at Bennington Battlefield, and the archaeologists decided to do it in an open manner. They said, we're going to do metal detecting. If any of you folks want to come out and help, volunteers, come on out. When they got to the site to do that in the weeks prior, bad actors had gone in there with metal detectors and basically raped the site. So, good intentions sometimes lead to bad conclusions. So we kept this very quiet. People knew that we were going to do archaeology. They didn't know when we were going to do it. I had lots of folks come to me, say, I'd like to volunteer, I want to do help. No. So these are the individuals we relied on. Today, we're supposed to have Bill Griswold. He is the lead archaeologist for the Park Service in the Northeast region. So he works at the National Park Service Northeast Archaeological Center or school or resource program. But he was supposed to be here, but he's from New Hampshire, so you got the junior varsity today. So we also employed the American Veterans Archaeological Recovery. These are individuals who have done archaeology. They are veterans who are dealing with post-traumatic stress disorder. But they've gone to sites in England and other places in Europe to help recover human remains at battlefield sites like airplane crashes, things of that nature. So they are familiar with the process. Museum services, obviously we're going to find stuff, so we need some people to help protect that and take care of those collections. Paul Martin will talk about what his role is in all this, and the advanced metal detection for the archaeologists. 30 years ago, if you mentioned metal detecting and archaeologists, it was archaeologists, bad. Archaeology and metal detecting does not go well. Today is a principal tool. It is the best means of finding things with minimal disturbance. If anyone has ever seen an archaeological site when it was done way back when you put out the grids and you basically licked off the topsoil and it was very disturbing, very disturbing. Well, here we can actually pinpoint. And the one thing about Jumonville Glen, for those of you who have been there and those who have not been there, it's very rocky. So we could not use ground penetrating radar. It was very hard to get a nice level surface to do that. So we had to rely on metal detecting to find those items. One thing about the archaeology, and it's different, everyone goes, oh, archaeology is cool. Where a lot of folks fail in archaeology is they don't record. So when I do programs at Gettysburg, I often have a whole tray of bullets. And I have the kids look at it, and we can talk about the different bullets. Some are Confederate bullets, round ball, all that kind of stuff. And then the question I always ask the kids, I say, where were these found? Because I don't know where they were found either. I bought them at one of the stores in Gettysburg just to have a nice display, but that history is lost. So that's why it's important to record. We also map. And the beauty of today is we have LIDAR. A means of mapping with a radar system that's very, very accurate. So we can use satellite pinpointing so we can say, yes, this is where this object was found. And to me, one of the most important things of the archaeological work we've done here was the LIDAR. So to kind of get you an idea for those of you who have been there or haven't been there, this is the old parking lot. There's the entrance road sits way out here. But this is the old parking lot. You now park a little bit further back. This is the rock face. So the French would have been camped down in here. And what's interesting, when we did this first map, did anyone see kind of an interesting feature there that kind of stands out that looks like it's man-made, other than the parking lot? What in the dickens is that? That's the real Area 51, right? Yeah. We were puzzled by that. So this is what this looks like right here. So we walked down there and took a look at it. Anyone here want to guess what that site, what created that circular pad? No, not a well, no. I'll give you a clue. Think of the early iron industry. Well, what fueled the early iron industry? Charcoal. Charcoal. It's a Collier pit. So when they cut down the trees, they would flatten out an area, and that's where they would burn the charcoal. That's what that was. So, you may say, okay, now we're talking about Collier pits in Jumonville Glen. Well, what that forced us to do is to go down here and look at this draw. And one of my questions has always been, how did the French get down into the Glen? Well, this draw goes all the way back to what would be the Braddock Road. So this is where the French would enter, to come down here and camp. And it plays an important role when you look at the various accounts of the skirmish that occurred there. So again, pardon my wonderful technology here. I come from the age of 8-track tapes, so just be grateful I was able to draw a fairly good line here. But again, based on this study, we can see this is how the French would have entered in here. Because it's still fairly steep on this side, even though we do have a trail today that goes down. This trail did not exist. You know, the Park Service was not nice enough to put that in for the French. So it's been difficult trying to get down off that edge there. But this is a nice, gradual descent down into this valley. So that plays a key role into our story. Now, if any of you are familiar with Dave Preston's book, Dr. Preston's book, Braddock's Defeat, The Road to Revolution, in the appendix of the book, he had found in his research an account of a Native American who was at Council, today what we call Fort Cumberland, in the fall of 1754. And to me, it is probably the best account of the Jumonville affair. So most people kind of gravitate to Washington. I mean, the French accounts are kind of this guy's spot on. So he talks about Washington, directing Washington men to go straight up a hill where the French would be. So right here is where the Collier pit is. And I have a ranger standing there. And just up this hill, just on the other side of this, is the Jumonville Glen site, 60 yards away. So the approach that Washington's men would have taken would have brought them down to this point where they would have divided up. Washington would also write about how he said that the French, called out, and they didn't do that. He said, "No, I was in the front, and I saw them run for their guns, and I told my men to fire." So, and they were briskly defeated. So again, this is continuing up that hill, and then just over that edge, right here is the Glen itself. Again, pardon the bad photography, I'm not Matthew Brady, but gives you an idea of the terrain. We always talked about the approach coming straight on from the parking lot, and when you read the account about how the Iroquois warriors said, no, they went up the hill. Just, we're going to keep it real easy for you Virginians. All you have to do is just go straight up this hill. And the Half King and our guys are going to go to the left, and we're going to send a couple warriors to the right. Again, the Iroquois warrior says that when they got to the top of the hill, Washington begun himself. So Washington was literally in the front. And it was not a long affair. Even though Washington would say it was about 15 minutes, based on the archaeological finds, it was not a long firefight. And most of the damage, as you can see there, was done by the Native Americans as the French fled down the valley to escape. Their guns were not working, it had been damp, it had been raining the night before, so a lot of misfires, and off the French went. So this is another LiDAR, and again, to put everything in perspective for you, this is the Jumonville Road that comes off of US Route 40, going in a southerly direction. You'll go to the summit, as we call it. This was the old entrance road and parking lot into Jamonville Glen. This is the current parking lot, little S shape right there. And then the trail that gets the public down to the Glen itself. So here's the rock face. There's that ravine, that draw, and there's the Collier's Pit. So, with the magic of art, again, my art teacher's turning in her grave. So the Braddock Road trace is up here, up by where the modern road is today. You can see the approach coming in. Here's the Collier Pit. This is where they divide up. Washington's men just simply go up this hill, and they're overlooking it. The Half King and his warriors swing down and kind of take up a position here. There's some boulders and other things right here. And there's a Native American, Makatutha Scaronides, also known as, becomes the new Half King after the first Half King would die in 1754 with a gentleman named Cherokee Jack, who went to the right of Washington. Where exactly he went to, I don't know if he came down this draw or whatever, but somehow he's able to get down here and convince the French to surrender. So the initial action, so it's basically an L-shaped ambush. British come up here, they see the French see them, they exchange a few shots, the French run down here, they encounter the Half King where a lot of the slaughter is done, the remaining French come back here, encounter these guys along with the British who are starting to work their way down, and it's over. Now the archaeology. So, the stuff, right? That's why you dig. You want to find stuff. So this is the first musket ball we found. We found 5 altogether. You're like, 5? Is that it? That's 5 more than the archaeologists thought we would find. So, considering the short duration of the battle, 33 British, some of the natives might have had some muskets, French are having trouble firing their muskets. We were lucky to find these 5. The caliber range anywhere 62 to 64 caliber. We did find one that was about 68 caliber. We don't have them here today because they're being analyzed. There's a new science where they're actually able to analyze the lead. The lead actually will have its own fingerprint, and they can actually determine where it was mined. And this process will still be viable for bullets up until the time of the American Civil War. By that time, the lead starts just mixing too much because of the Industrial Revolution. But they could trace it, the lead, to a certain mine in England or a certain mine in France, because not only the lead, but there can be tin or antimony and other objects in there that give it a very unique signature. So there's a graduate student at, I almost hate to say it, Indiana University of Pennsylvania. I went to Cal U, sorry, they're a rival of ours. Benjamin Ford, who's the professor there, had a grad student who took all the bullets, all 5 of them, plus all the bullets from Fort Necessity, and analyzed them, and basically said they kind of fell into 2 camps. Now, I'm still waiting for the final report, but they were able to have 2 distinct signatures. So I got to hold all those bullets in my bare hand before the museum guys, get you. So I liken it to the moment when I held my children for the first time. Yeah, holding my children is still up there. It's at the top, but that's darn close. To think that you're holding an object that has been in the ground for 269 years, and the last time it was held by a human being was when it was loaded in a gun and fired in anger at somebody. And all the bullets we found were fired. They weren't dropped. They all showed damage from being fired. Oops, go the right way.
Ron has a question there.
Yes?
How deep down were they down?
They range from 4 centimeters to 8 centimeters. So here are the 5 bullets, the 5 musket balls. We did find 2 other balls that looked like pistol caliber. I will tell you that the bullets were found in the Glen. So it doesn't seem like the French returned fire in much way. We didn't find anything up top. I'm just going to tell you that right now. So I think the French had great difficulty firing any shots. So, but these are the 5 musket balls right here. So literally one of those might be the first shot of the Revolution, or French Indian War, excuse me. And might literally have been fired by Washington. I can just envision Washington out in front and firing that first shot. Now you might say, why would Washington do that? Well, Washington does report that after the battle, he once compensated for one good rifle that he left behind at Fort Necessity and was picked up by one of his soldiers because all their horses were dead. He told guys, you know what, you're welcome to get anything you want. And about a month after the battle, he's writing to Captain James Mackay of the South Carolina Regiment. And Mackay says, I found the guy that took your rifle, but he says, you know what? You told them they could keep stuff. He's keeping the rifle, and you have enough money to buy your own. That literally could have been the gun that fired the first shot, right there. Now the other interesting part. Yeah, this is one I always get asked a lot. Did you find any dead people? Yeah. Well, I'm going to give you the same answer because it was floating in my head. When I was in college, my major was history, but I kind of dabbled in archaeology. I was a very nice graduate student named Kelly Lynn that kind of piqued my interest in the field of archaeology. I was interested in archaeology too. But the professor at the time said, when we did our field school, if any of you find a skeleton in the ground, I'm going to give you an F. So this is back in the 80s. NAGPRA is just coming into being, disturbance of human remains. It's not the cool thing anymore, having collections of skulls in the labs. No, that stuff ought to get repatriated back. So very sensitive to it. When we started this project, our other partners included our affiliated nations. So we do have to contact them, just let them know we're doing this, and consultation. We also contacted the British Embassy and the French Embassy. Of those two, the British were more interested. The French were like, whatever. Just in case. We had to come up with a plan in case we did find human remains. Because again, don't want to get that F. So Washington, when he's writing about what happened there, and he writes several accounts, several letters, each one gets a little juicier, some details. And he basically says, yeah, we killed 11 of them, captured 20. Only one of mine was killed with 2 or 3 wounded, some so slight. But then if you read the Iroquois Warriors account, how did that one man in Virginia's company die? He was shot by one of his own men. His friendly fire. He didn't get hit by a French musket ball. As those British are probably moving out and around, one guy's a little bit far forward, as this account says, and he took one for the team. Yeah, Washington we don't even know the guy's name. That's unfortunate, but the lone British casualty. With the French, we rely on Charles Bonne, who was a French Marine. Some historians kind of look at his account and go, he wrote this stuff many years later, and there are some issues with it. But again, think about things, if you were asked to write about what you did in grade school, how accurate would that be? What would your memories be? But there are some details he is very good on. I especially like when he talks about the Canadian who comes in talking about what happened at Jumonville Glen. Monceau is the one who escapes, and he basically says, yeah, there was a guy that escaped, and he said he heard the screams and yelling and men dying, and he just left. Yeah, that's fairly accurate. But he also talks about being on the expedition to take Fort Necessity. And to me, the most poignant moment of the campaign is that midday when they arrive at Jumonville Glen, and de Villiers, who is the French commander, takes a moment to see where his brother had died. So imagine that. And he gives the kind of the Newt Rockney speech. The natives that are with him are not local. They are from the Great Lakes. And they take time, as Charles says, to bury what they find. I don't know how they buried stuff there. That ground is so rocky, so hard. But I'm sure they gathered up what they could and probably piled things on top of it. Bark, sticks, whatever. I also just don't, soldiers back then did not have an E-tool either. So taking picks and shovels with him, things of that nature. Again, this was kind of a quick expedition, wasn't thought to be a siege, so why would you have that heavy equipment, those tools to bury the dead? So, but we do know that there were dead buried there, buried in quotes. So how do we do that? Oh, geez, the ranger put it on the wrong slide. Well, Paul Martin, the archaeologist I talked about, this is the new endeavor right now. Cadaver dogs. Cadaver dogs are like what metal detecting was 30 years ago. Archaeologists, the jury is still out. But according to Paul Martin, you can detect human remains, might be in the ground up to 1,000 years. Boy, we are stinky folks, right? Yeah. So part of the reason why we kept the area closed off and we didn't have lots of folks tromping around was to allow the dogs, there was a set of 4 dogs, to do their thing over 2 weeks. And we had perfect weather for it. It was not very wet. They went about. And I will say that we found 2 areas that the dogs hit on. One of them fits in very well with the description of the battle, of where the slaughter would have been done by the Native Americans. Digging, as we did the metal detecting, we found no human remains. Nothing. The ground is very acidic. Again, burials that were not really true burials, think of what animals would have done with the bones. It's very much like Fort Necessity. There were no human remains ever found at Fort Necessity, and there were 33 people buried there, supposedly buried there. So I'm very much of the theory of let the dead rest in peace. I know there's folks out there say you're going to continue to do archaeology and find these human remains. No, I'm satisfied with the fact that we now do actually preserve the site of the battle. We have the battlefield, and to me, preserving it is the memorial to these individuals who fought and died there without doing any more disturbance, just so we could say, yes, we have a piece of the skull or the tooth or something of that nature. Again, protecting the site. And I'll end it on this famous quote, kind of a postscript to Washington's letter to his younger brother. I heard the bullets whistle and they're by my head, and there's something charming in the sound. George could be a knucklehead. Let's just put it that way. So definitely a moment in his career that he would remember, even in the midst of the revolution. He and Adam Stephen, who was another fellow officer, would kind of commiserate about the events that occurred in the Great Meadows along the banks of the Monongahela. So definitely a very important part of Washington's life and something that he remembered. So artifacts, I did bring some. I know they're not super exciting, but you're welcome to come up and look at these. I can prove that Native Americans from Michigan were involved. Okay? It's kind of a joke, maybe. Archery Fred Bear was located in Grayling, Michigan at one time before they moved to Florida. But yeah, that's a bear broadhead. So people who do illegal things down in the Glen. Lots of bullet casings. This is from 4570. This is one of about a dozen we found, and they were spaced out. They were of the same company, I think it's Remington Peters. And I could actually trace where someone was walking and shooting their 4570. Pistol cartridges, 30-06, lots of shotgun shells. And maybe you ever lost your toy handcuffs there? I found them. The bane of the archaeologist, the metal detector, is the good old pull tab. Yeah, look at that. It sounds just like a lead bullet in the earphones when you're using the metal tech. And boy, we found a lot of these down there. So we're like, man, this must have been a serious battle here. Oh, pull tab. So lots of pull tabs. We know locals were involved. Got some Rolling Rock here. Perfume bottle. People would eat lunch there. So maybe you lost your silverware. So lots of things associated with people having a good time and partying down there, obviously. The site became protected in the 1820s. Up until that point, private property. It was sold to the Methodist camp next door. The property was also at one time part of the orphanage. There were orphanage schools in Pennsylvania for young individuals who had lost a family member during the Civil War or after the Civil War. They died, they're orphaned, so they were raised in these schools. So we found actually a button off of probably a jacket that had the coat of arms of Pennsylvania on it. If you're familiar with that, with the two horses and the crest. So one of the kids used to play there. They were actually given guns, you know, trapdoor and old Springfields and stuff, and they go and play in down in the Glen. So one of them lost a button there. But they began preserving the site, but then as anything, it's remote, it's fun to go there and drink and party and so forth. So just in the 4 weeks we were there, we took out 4 large garbage bags just of junk. So, and some of it's related to the early industry there. This is probably left by someone who was part of the lumbering that was done there. Everything had been clear cut there prior to the 1920s. So even though it looks like old growth cars there, it's just been allowed to regenerate. But I brought this as a sampling in. Someday we're going to have that stuff on display, the bullets themselves. But at this point, I'll answer any questions you might have, and I appreciate your time and listening so far. Yeah.
Oh, sir, so what has the archaeological project, what will it change about the site? Will we be making a new trail that went around, like the coal pit where the Half King circled around?
Probably not.
Okay,
So we do have trails there already.
okay.
Obviously the trail down, and then there's a return trail that almost mimics that, following that gully back up. So, but when I do the anniversary program, I'll take folks down that way. So if you come like on May 28th, we get to collect ticks and that kind of stuff.
I'll try to remember to come and bring my commentary.
Yes.
How long did it take to, 2 questions, how long did it take to find the bullets? And number 2, is there a possibility, not criticizing your work, that maybe more bullets are still there somewhere? How organized, how organized was that effort?
It was very organized, and I'm going to say this now, there is stuff still there. Because the methodology is you don't rape the whole site. I'll just say that. I'm not going to give you the percentage that we worked on, but again, it falls within the parameters of modern archaeology where you don't do the whole site.
And when you found the bullets, did you know that they were, just by looking at them, that's them, or did you have to do studies or whatever?
Oh, we knew it was that. And we were finding on the first day of metal detecting found. We actually used a code. We were actually so worried that people might have been listening to our radio signals. So when we found a bullet, we say, oh, we found poison ivy. That was our secret. Now you know the secret's out. So, but yeah, we would use that code just so in case there were people listening, we had law enforcement there 24/7. We had cameras out there. I know it seems like overly protected, but we have taken people out of there. I did arrest some folks 3 years ago, metal detecting. And plus next door, if you're familiar with Braddock's story, is a very rich archaeological site of Dunbar's camp. So, and there's people that go purposely there to dig up the cannonballs and other things that were dumped by Braddock's army in the summer of '55. Someone else? Well, I'll get to you, get this, maybe.
You said that cadaver dogs found honed in on 2 sites, one of which corresponded to what we know as the valley. How far off was the other side?
It sits in the midst of the camp, to say that. And our archaeological investigation went through that area, and we did not find human remains. We weren't trying to find it, but it was part of our grid. Getting back to your question, we set up grids, and we did not find human remains. I don't know if we get him. So you have one more question? Or?
I was just wondering, do you know why no archaeological excavation was done previously?
I think the folks were just satisfied thinking they had the site. So, yeah. So sometimes it's good to wait because then we have all these modern techniques. So, and there's still things that there's always time down the road if they ever want to do more, but chances are they probably won't.
So you guys only use a metal detector, so arrowheads, you would never find that.
No.
Never find that.
Yeah, we're looking for the metal objects. That was our key. Yeah. find that kind of stuff, we would really have to move a lot of earth, and that's just, and that's the thing, we always think of as the camp for the French, but it's a good campsite for the indigenous people that would have been there too. So we had, again, that's why we're contacting the native folks, just in case we found something that was from historic or prehistoric period.
The different Indian trout, can you tell the different arrowhead anyway? Or not?
I'm sure someone can,
Yeah,
I failed that part of archaeology. I know as time goes on, they get smaller and smaller, and at Fort Necessity, we do know the natives were still using bow and arrow, not everyone could afford a musket, and by that point, they're using metal points. They were taking like the old trade kettles that had fallen apart, and they would cut them into small triangular points. So, yeah.
Yeah, I just got back from Lexington, Massachusetts, it was just, at Concord, the British were carrying on a bridge at Concord, Massachusetts. The militia were looking at it on the top of the hill, and so they finally did the French archaeology, and they had, all the guys had changed their flints, their muskets, and there was a line of them, so you wouldn't get that from a metal detector. The Park Service does have that, so they've gone down and done a deal.
I've stood on that site, yeah, where Butchers' guys had stood, and he was told, put in fresh flints before they marched down. It's funny you bring up Minuteman Park, because the archaeology crew that did this did work at Harper's Revenge,
Yes.
and also did work at Freeman's Farm at Saratoga. So,
You mentioned that you were at Fort Necessity and Friendship Hill. I don't know what Friendship Hill is.
that's okay. You weren't sleeping in school that day. You ever hear of Albert Gallatin? Well, you must have really been sleeping. Okay. Albert Gallatin was Secretary of the Treasury under Presidents Jefferson and Madison. He's the one who makes those two guys look good in the history book. He would help reduce the national debt by half. He would help finance the Louisiana Purchase and Lewis and Clark's expedition. And he has 50 years of public service. He helped to write a new state constitution for Pennsylvania in 1788. He's famous for being involved in the Whiskey Rebellion. He's one of the founders of New York University. He was an ambassador to both England and France, helped end the War of 1812. Again, busy guy. The reason why he's famous is because he is a failure as a farmer. Our 5 parks deal with failure. Failed farmer, Gallatin. Failed military expedition, Washington. Failed transportation system, that's the Allegheny Portage Railroad. Failed dam, Johnstown flood. And a failed terrorist attack, Flight 93. Passengers were able to bring that plane down. So there you go. Is that it? There's several good biographies out there. Raymond Walters Jr. wrote one in the 1950s. If you suffer from insomnia, it's a good read, but very thorough. Albert Gallatin, Jeffersonian financier, definitely. Yes?
I've always wondered why, was George coming with his crew from Fort Necessity, and would they have been on that old road, Braddock Road on the top, or would they naturally have come up from Fort Necessity up the hollow over the hill?
Well, they followed the Gist Road, the trade road. For a year, it was called Washington's Road, and this guy Braddock improved it and became known as Braddock's Road. So pretty much where the Macadam Road is coming up from the summit, that kind of parallels Braddock's Road, so they would have followed that. But, Washington had only gotten as far as the Great Meadows, so his road building party had not extended that far west yet. So he's relying on the Native Americans, where are these French at? And they got him to the site. I mean, they made it, ambush for dummies. 50 yards, right up there, buddy, you'll find him, and the Half King's a pretty smart guy. He's playing Washington. He's always hated the French, so here's his opportunity. He figures, I'm gonna let that kid get it started, and I'll be waiting for him. He just knew the French were gonna flee down that valley, and was waiting for him.
And when he came back, they attacked Fort Necessity, and George and all the people left their personal items, and he left his journal. And then the French took that journal and sent it to Paris and then published it. And they were very critical of George. Is that different? I don't want to get off on. Dinwiddie, I think, published George's 2 years for the American colonists to read what was going on. But then the French took his journal from Fort Necessity. Do you know, are those 2 different documents?
Washington always would claim that it didn't seem right to him because the original English version disappeared. So they're translating the French back into English and like,
Oh.
yeah, it's kind of been monkeyed with. But you know, when you line it up with the letters, it's not that far off. It's not. And he did what he's a lawyer by profession. So when he writes to his superiors, you know, he said, you know, Washington was aiding the Indians in their attack on the French, you know, things like that. So again, there's no formal war declared at this time. They're all playing CYA.
Well, we don't know if that was a true campsite, right? That's like unusual, it was off the trail. So for them to go down in the woods there to find a creek and a rock cliff and,
Okay, I'm gonna advocate for Jumonville. So, he's in an area that he's not familiar with. They have no natives guiding them, so that's maybe why he has a large party. The French have yet to really consolidate an alliance with the local folks. So, I'm gonna take a large party with me. It's rainy, it's windy. Hey, someone's found a nice little campsite just off the road. And they do build what they call shelter. They call them cabins, but they were probably like bark little lean-tos against the rock face. And it gets you out of the wind, it's out of the weather. So that's about as far as I can defend Jumonville. So I also think that Monceau he's the Canadian who runs off. I think he was actually on guard duty. I think that's how he was able to get away. I think that the French and the British and Indians got past him somehow, or he's far enough that once he, you know, like when he was sleeping, who knows? And it was, boom, we heard the shots, I can't help my buddies, I'm out.
Was he barefoot? Was he barefoot?
Yeah, so he says. But yeah, barefoot's nothing unusual. Moccasins, I mean, that time of the year, most people went barefoot. That's not, you know, I had a great-grandmother, she didn't wear shoes unless she went to church or to town, had calluses that thick in her feet, but she was a country girl. I mean, shoes were expensive. So, yeah, moccasins can be really slippery. Yeah, moccasins. So.
Do we know if Jumonville was buried on the site, or if, being an officer, he was moved?
So there was, about 30 years ago at the Braddock Road Preservation Association, Heiser said he had found the grave of Jumonville in downtown Pittsburgh, but it was a register of burials at Fort Duquesne. He misread it. It was not Jumonville, it's Simonville. So nothing was brought back to be buried somewhere else. Jumonville was buried there, well, buried somewhere in the confines of the site with the other. There were 13 French killed, 1 British killed. There are some that escaped and kind of like clocked, you know, later. You know, Washington writes about, oh, I heard some escape, but the Indians said they found them, and if you read the Iroquois' account, they do come upon a Frenchman who escapes, and they say, oh, they thought he was one of the lost English guys. You got lost. Let's take you back to the camp. The guy doesn't want to go back to camp. And they kind of get the suspicion up, and went, wait a minute, you're French. Whack. And they tell Washington, Washington writes, yeah, I heard they whacked another guy. So. Yes.
What effect do you expect this archaeology will have on your visitors in the next couple of years?
What effect? Well, I hope more folks will go visit the site. Again, we'll get some of those items out on display. Hopefully it'll pique some interest. But again, it's that balance. We don't want to get loved to death. Yeah. Some of you are familiar with Gettysburg. They've had their site, the Round Tops, have been closed for almost 2 years because it's gotten loved to death, and they're trying to figure out a way where they can park buses and cars and not bring all these social trails. I don't think it'll ever be a problem at Jumonville Glen. It's just the remoteness that always bothers me. So I want to get folks out there, but our biggest threat to the resource, people. But it definitely has piqued interest. We've had some articles written about the site. So like anything, we have ebbs and flows. You know. I know when Brady and I did our little conflab out there for his TV show, there was definitely a spike in interest in that. And in fact, I still have people go, hey, weren't you on TV a few weekends ago? And I'm like, oh yeah.
It's on YouTube now, everyone can.
Was Dr. Burns involved in this archaeological?
Was
Dr. Burns, was he involved in
No.
this?
Well, I'm gonna thank.
Okay.
We feel very fortunate to be able to offer a talk like this to our membership, and we hope to continue to be able to do so.
You're the
Thank you all
first
for
group.
attending.
It's the first time we've done the program. So again, by spring, all those reports, the final report's supposed to be done, including the parts I'm supposed to write. So, but yeah, we got the gist of it right here.
Thank you again.
Thank you.